A kind, homeless girl decides to help a millionaire having trouble with his car. Hours later, the same man cruelly pushes her off a bridge, but her dog saw everything, and what he did left everyone speechless. Before we get started, if you, like us, love animals, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any heartwarming stories. Thanks. Now back to our story. The rain fell softly over the city, turning the busy streets into a maze of colorful umbrellas and shimmering reflections in the puddles. Amidst the hurried comings and goings of passers-by, a small figure stood out. Lily, a 10-year-old girl, was sheltering under the awning of an old storefront, sharing her small space with Buddy, a dog with abundant fur and tender eyes who didn't leave her side for a second. Her big brown eyes attentively watched the street traffic, while her small hands absent-mindedly stroked the head of her faithful companion. The smell of wet asphalt brought back memories of happier days when her dad, Charlie, would take her to the auto shop where he worked. "Smell that rain, kiddo," he used to say, with that warm smile that lit up his face. "It's the best perfume in the world." Charlie had been more than a father. He was her teacher, her hero, her safe harbor. With him, Lily learned not only about cars and engines, but about the values that really mattered in life. Be honest in everything you do, and help others whenever you can. That's what makes us truly rich, were words he repeated often, and that now constantly echoed in the girl's thoughts. It had been a year since Charlie passed away, a victim of a terrible accident that changed Lily's life forever. Since then, she and Buddy had become street dwellers in the city, surviving thanks to the kindness of some shopkeepers and the street smarts that hard life had taught them. But not for a moment did Lily forget her father's teachings about honesty and compassion. A loud metallic noise caught her attention. Across the street, a silver luxury car was stopped, and its engine was making a sound that Lily knew very well. The driver, a man in an elegant suit who looked to be in his 50s, was gesturing frustratedly on the phone. "Come on, Buddy," Lily whispered, and the two carefully crossed the street. As they approached, they could hear the man's angry voice. "What do you mean there aren't any mechanics available? I have a very important event in 2 hours." "Excuse me, sir," she said shyly, her voice almost disappearing under the sound of the rain. "I think I know what's happening with your car." Lily straightened her shoulders, a spark of pride shining in her eyes. "My dad was a mechanic, the best in town. He taught me everything about cars. From the sound, it sounds like a belt behind the dashboard. Can I take a look?" As Lily approached the vehicle, Buddy sat patiently beside her, as if he were her personal assistant. The rain continued to fall softly, but the girl barely noticed, focused on her task. Her small, skillful fingers worked with precision, recalling every lesson her father had taught her. With the dexterity of someone who grew up among engines and tools, Lily quickly diagnosed the problem. "It's exactly what I thought, Mr. Alves. The belt is just a little loose, but I can make a temporary adjustment." Her eyes scanned the wet ground until they found a small piece of wire discarded nearby, which she skillfully transformed into an improvised tool. Richard watched, fascinated, as the little girl worked with the focus of an experienced professional. Her nimble fingers moved with precision, and in a few minutes, the annoying noise had stopped completely. Buddy, sitting patiently beside her, seemed to display a look of pride for his young owner. "Incredible!" exclaimed Richard, starting the engine and noting that the sound had indeed disappeared. "You are truly extraordinary, Lily. Let me reward you." He pulled his wallet from the inner pocket of his suit jacket, but before he could take out some bills, Lily stepped back politely. "You don't need to pay me, Mr. Alves. My dad always said that helping others is more important than money. I'm glad I could help." A shy smile lit up her face, making her eyes shine with a wisdom beyond her years. Richard put his wallet away, but his shrewd eyes studied the girl with growing interest. As a successful businessman, he recognized an opportunity when he saw one. "You know, Lily, you've reminded me of something important. Tonight, I'm hosting a benefit event at the Hope Bridge. It's to help children in vulnerable situations like yourself." "Yes," replied Richard, adjusting his expensive tie with a studied gesture. "In fact, I'd like to invite you to be my special guest. Your story could inspire many people to contribute. What do you think?" Lily bit her lip, hesitant. On the one hand, the idea of being able to help other children made her feel useful and important. On the other, years on the streets had taught her to be cautious with strangers, even well-dressed ones. Buddy, sensing her indecision, nudged his nose into her hand as if to remind her of his protective presence. Richard smiled, mentally calculating how the image of a street girl and her faithful dog could further increase the emotional appeal of his event. "Of course you can. In fact, it will be perfect. I'll send a car to pick you up at 7 o'clock, right here at this spot. What do you say?" As she watched the luxury car drive away, Lily felt a confusing mix of emotions. She was excited about the possibility of helping other children, but something in the way Richard spoke left her uneasy. Buddy, always sensitive to his owner's mood, leaned against her legs, offering his silent comfort. "What do you think, Buddy?" she whispered, stroking the dog's soft ears. "Dad always said to trust our instincts, but also to give people a chance." Buddy responded with a soft bark, as if to say he would be by her side, regardless of her decision. The next few hours passed slowly as Lily and Buddy waited under the awning, sheltering from the rain that continued to fall. The girl took the time to try to tidy herself up as best she could, using the store window as an improvised mirror. Carefully, she combed her hair with her fingers and tried to clean the stains from her worn dress. As the sky darkened and the city lights began to turn on, Lily felt her heart beat faster. She was about to enter a world completely different from her own, a world of luxury and power that she only knew from afar. But her father's words echoed in her mind, giving her courage. "Always be yourself, honey. True wealth is in people's hearts." Exactly at 7 o'clock, a black and shiny car stopped in front of her. The driver, wearing an impeccable uniform, got out and opened the rear door with a bow. "Miss Lily," he called politely. "Mr. Alves sent me to pick you up." The interior of the car was more luxurious than anything Lily had ever seen. The soft leather of the seats and the mild scent of a new car made her feel out of place, but Buddy, sitting well-behaved beside her, seemed to give her the courage she needed to move forward. Through the dark windows, she watched the city lights pass by like shooting stars, creating a mesmerizing spectacle. "Is this your first time going to the Hope Bridge, miss?" asked the driver gently, his eyes meeting hers through the rearview mirror. His words, although gentle, made Lily squirm uncomfortably in the seat. Why would such an important businessman be so interested in a street girl? Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "All that glitters is not gold, honey. Sometimes people aren't exactly what they seem to be." When the car finally stopped, Lily gaped at the spectacle before her eyes. The Hope Bridge, normally just another concrete structure over the city river, had been transformed into a fairy tale setting. Thousands of decorative lights twinkled against the night sky, reflecting in the dark waters below. A red carpet stretched across its entire length, and dozens of elegantly dressed people circulated, their laughter and conversations mixing with the soft music that hung in the air. "Come on, miss," said Albert, opening the car door. "Mr. Alves is waiting." "Ah, you've arrived." Richard's voice sounded loud and theatrical as he approached with open arms. He was even more elegant than before, his suit clearly costing more than Lily and her father had ever owned. "Come, come. I want to introduce you to some very important people." In the following minutes, Lily found herself being introduced to a succession of smiling faces and names that she could barely register. Everyone seemed delighted with her story, asking questions about her father and how she had learned so much about mechanics. Buddy, surprisingly, became an attraction in himself, with several people praising his impeccable behavior. Among the guests, one lady in particular caught Lily's attention, Unlike the others, Mrs. Helen, as she introduced herself, had a truly gentle and interested look. Her grey hair framed a face marked by expression wrinkles that seemed to have been sculpted by years of sincere smiles. Before they could continue the conversation, Richard reappeared, this time accompanied by a man carrying a professional camera. "Lily, the time has come. Let's make your speech to the donors. Remember what we agreed. Talk about how difficult it is to live on the streets and how the money raised today will help other children like you." Richard's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly composed himself. "I must have forgotten to mention that small detail. But don't worry, just speak from the heart. You'll do great." Mrs. Helen, who was watching the scene closely, frowned as she noticed the girl's evident discomfort. Discreetly, she approached Albert, the driver, and started a conversation in a low voice. The man, maintaining his professional posture, only nodded slightly, but his eyes revealed a genuine concern. Richard went up on stage first, his bright smile immediately capturing everyone's attention. "Dear friends and benefactors," he began, his melodious voice echoing through the microphones. "Tonight, I have the honor of introducing you to a very special young woman, a girl who, despite all the adversities that life has imposed on her, keeps in her heart the noblest values of humanity." While the businessman spoke, Lily noticed something strange happening backstage at the event. Men in dark suits moved discreetly, carrying folders and talking in whispers. One of them, younger than the others, dropped some papers, which were quickly picked up, but not before Lily could see what appeared to be complicated numbers and graphs. A staff member gently nudged her forward, and she found herself facing dozens of expectant faces. The lights were even more intense there, and for a moment, Lily felt completely lost. It was then that she felt something familiar. Buddy had followed her steps onto the stage, and now he was sitting majestically beside her, as if that were his rightful place. "Tell them about your life on the streets," whispered Richard, a little too loudly, causing some people in the audience to shift uncomfortably. "My name is Lily," she began again, her voice now firmer, "and this is my friend Buddy. A year ago, after my dad passed away, we ended up living on the streets. But I'm not here to ask for help for myself. There are many other kids who need support, a chance to show their worth." As she spoke, Lily noticed that Mrs. Helen had approached a group of journalists present at the event. The elderly lady seemed to be showing something on her cell phone that caused expressions of surprise on the reporters' faces. "Wonderful," interrupted Richard abruptly, taking the microphone. "What a moving story. And that's why, my friends, we need your generous donations. Every penny raised today will be..." Mrs. Helen had positioned herself close to the stage, her eyes fixed on Richard with an expression that mixed sadness and determination. Beside her, Albert maintained a serious posture, discreetly holding a manila envelope. The businessman's face paled visibly, and his hands began to tremble slightly as he held the microphone. Lily, still on stage, felt Buddy tense up beside her, as if sensing that something important was about to happen. The murmur in the audience increased every second, turning into an increasingly loud murmur of indignation. Mrs. Helen, with a calmness that only years can provide, climbed onto the stage with firm steps, followed by Albert, who was still holding the manila envelope with determination. "For the past 6 months," began Mrs. Helen, her voice clear and strong, "I have been investigating the philanthropic activities of Mr. Richard Alves. As a member of the City Social Services Board, I could not ignore certain irregularities that came to my attention." "Transparent like muddy water," interrupted Albert, speaking for the first time in public. His voice, normally so restrained, now carried a surprising strength. "For 15 years, Mr. Alves, I transported documents, overheard conversations, saw things. I kept silent out of fear, but today, inspired by the courage of this little one," he smiled gently at Lily, "I decided that I can no longer remain silent. Lily watched everything with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. Buddy, beside her, kept his eyes fixed on Richard, as if he were ready to protect his owner at any moment. In the middle of the audience, several photographers recorded every moment, their flashes illuminating the night like lightning. Richard, now visibly flustered, tried to snatch the microphone from Mrs. Helen's hands, but several event security guards, who apparently answered to a higher authority than his, gently prevented him. The lady's words touched Lily deeply, reminding her even more of her father. A solitary tear rolled down her face, but it was a tear of pride, not of sadness. Buddy, noticing her emotion, nudged his nose affectionately into her hand. "But we're not here to destroy, but to build," continued Mrs. Helen, her voice now softer. "As president of the board, I propose that we transform this event into something truly meaningful. How about we establish a permanent program to support children in street situations, managed transparently by the board?" The proposal was received with enthusiastic applause from the audience. Several of those present, businessmen and influential people of the city, immediately began to approach Mrs. Helen, offering support and resources for the new initiative. "You built a house of cards," interrupted Mrs. Helen, firmly but without cruelty. "And now it's time to build something solid, based on true compassion and honesty." Lily, still on stage, felt simultaneously small and large. Small before the magnitude of the events, but large for having, even unintentionally, helped reveal an important truth. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Honesty always finds its way, honey, like a river that always reaches the sea." The night that should have been the triumph of Richard Alves turned into a moment of renewal for the entire city. While the authorities led the businessman discreetly out of the event, Mrs. Helen took charge of the situation with the elegance of someone who has spent a lifetime serving others. "My dears," she addressed the remaining guests, many still processing the recent events, "I suggest we transform this moment of revelation into an opportunity for real change. Who here is willing to be part of a new project managed with complete transparency?" Hands began to rise, first timidly, then with growing enthusiasm. Businessmen, politicians, and ordinary citizens, all united by a genuine purpose. Among them, a gentleman with grey hair and gold-rimmed glasses stood out, approaching the stage. Lily, who was watching everything still beside Buddy, felt her heart race. A shelter? Could it be possible that other children like her could have a safe place to stay? The driver's words made Lily blush. "But I didn't do anything special," she murmured. "I just tried to help with the car like my dad taught me." The mention of her father made Lily's eyes fill with tears, but this time there was a smile on her lips. "He was the best dad in the world," she said, absent-mindedly stroking Buddy's ears. "He always said we should do good without expecting anything in return." The proposal took Lily by surprise. "Me? But I'm just a kid." Buddy, as if he understood the importance of the moment, let out a cheerful bark, making everyone smile. Lily looked at her faithful companion, then at the expectant faces around her. In her mind, her father's voice echoed once more. "When life offers an opportunity to do good, honey, grab it with both hands." "My dear," laughed Mrs. Helen, "Buddy will be our official mascot. In fact, I even have an idea for a special project with therapy dogs to help the children." In the weeks that followed the night at the Hope Bridge, Lily's life changed completely. The old building, donated by Dr. Martin, was being quickly transformed into a welcoming support center for children. The grey walls gained vibrant colors, and the previously empty rooms filled with comfortable furniture and hopeful smiles. Lily and Buddy had received a small room in the center, decorated with posters of cars and photographs of dogs. For the first time in a year, the girl had a real bed to sleep in, and Buddy, a soft cushion just for him. But what excited her most was being able to help other children who, like her, knew well the difficulties of life on the streets. On a sunny Saturday morning, while Lily was helping to organize clothing donations, Mrs. Helen hurriedly entered her room, holding an old and yellowed folder. "After that night on the bridge, I started researching more about your father, Charlie," explained Mrs. Helen, carefully opening the folder. "And I discovered something extraordinary. Your father," continued Mrs. Helen, her voice choked, "wasn't just an ordinary mechanic. He was part of a social project that existed 20 years ago called the Hope Garage. It was a program that taught mechanics to young people in vulnerable situations." "There's more," said Mrs. Helen, removing more documents from the folder. "The project was a huge success, helped dozens of young people get jobs and rebuild their lives. And do you know who was one of the main sponsors? The Alves family." Buddy, sensing his owner's emotion, rested his head on her lap, offering silent comfort. Lily stroked his ears distractedly, trying to process all that information. "But here's the most surprising part," continued Mrs. Helen, taking out one last document. "I found Anthony Alves's will. He left a specific clause determining that a significant portion of his assets should be destined for the continuation of social projects like the Hope Garage. Richard, apparently, never fulfilled that determination. Was by right destined for social projects from the beginning," completed Mrs. Helen. "And now, with these discoveries, we can ensure that that money finally reaches those who really need it." The discovery about her father's past and the true story of the Alves family left Lily in a whirlwind of emotions. For days, she spent hours looking at the old photograph, trying to imagine her father young, full of dreams and dedication in helping other young people. Buddy, always attentive to his owner's mood changes, rarely left her side. On a particularly busy afternoon at the shelter, while Lily was helping to welcome a new group of children, an unexpected visit caused a stir. Albert, Richard's former driver, arrived accompanied by several former employees of the Hope Garage. Among the visitors was John Smith, a middle-aged man with calloused hands and a gentle smile. "Your father, Charlie, was my teacher at the Hope Garage," he said, sitting next to Lily. "I was a troubled kid, without direction in life. But your father saw something in me that I couldn't even see in myself." Other stories began to emerge. Mary Doe, now the owner of her own auto shop, told how Charlie encouraged her at a time when female mechanics were even rarer. Peter Jones, now a technical instructor, recalled how Lily's father always said that every engine fixed is a life transformed. Mrs. Helen, who was watching everything with a serene smile, approached with an idea. "What if we reopened the Hope Garage, along with the shelter? We have the space, we have your experience, and now, with the money from the Alves Social Fund, we have the resources. But we can't forget about the younger children," reminded Lily, thinking of the other children at the shelter. "Not all of them will want to be mechanics." While the adults discussed the details of the project, Lily felt something strange in her heart, a mixture of joy and longing. Buddy, noticing her unease, nudged his nose into her hand, as he always did when she needed comfort. At that moment, Mrs. Helen called Lily to a large window overlooking the center's courtyard. Outside, several children were playing in the afternoon sun, their laughter echoing through the air. Among them, some already showed interest in the parked cars, pointing and discussing like little mechanics in training. The girl nodded, feeling a tear of happiness roll down her face. For the first time since losing her father, Lily felt that she truly understood the meaning of his legacy. It wasn't just the knowledge about mechanics, but a legacy of love and dedication to others. Autumn was already giving way to winter when the changes at the shelter really took shape. The old parking lot had been transformed into a small school workshop with equipment donated by local businessmen. The walls, once grey, now displayed colourful murals painted by the children themselves, depicting cars, tools, and dreams in vibrant colours. On a particularly cold morning, while Lily was helping to organise the tools in the workshop, an unexpected visit caught her attention. An elegant lady, with a haughty posture but a gentle look, crossed the courtyard accompanied by Mrs. Helen. Buddy, who was resting near the door, perked up his ears with interest. Lily's heart skipped a beat. Richard's mother? The girl didn't know exactly how to react, but something in the lady's sad smile made her relax. Clara approached one of the workbenches, running her fingers delicately over the organized tools. Richard was just a boy when his father passed away. Maybe I failed to pass on to him the true values that Anthony so cherished. Yes, agreed Clara, but now I have the chance to help correct the mistakes of the past. I came to offer not only financial support to the project, but also my personal participation. I would like to create a scholarship program in Anthony Alves' name. While the two ladies discussed the details of the program, Lily noticed a group of children who were timidly approaching the workshop. Among them was Marina, an 8-year-old girl who had arrived at the center the week before. Her eyes shone with fascination as she watched the tools. The request touched Lily deeply. It was as if a circle was closing. Now she was in her father's position, being able to pass on not only technical knowledge, but also important values. Clara Alves watched the scene with tears in her eyes. "It's amazing how life comes full circle," she commented to Mrs. Helen. "Here is a girl who has lost so much, but who continues to give so much of herself. She reminds me a lot of my Anthony." Buddy, who had approached the group, wagged his tail happily as if approving everything that was happening. A light drizzle began to fall outside, but inside the workshop, the atmosphere was warmed not only by the newly installed heaters, but mainly by the human warmth that emanated from everyone present. A month had passed since Clara Alves' visit, and the shelter was bustling with activity. The school workshop already had 15 regular students, including Marina, who demonstrated a natural talent for mechanics. The mornings were filled with theoretical lessons, and the afternoons dedicated to practice, always under the watchful supervision of John Smith and other volunteer instructors. On a particularly busy Wednesday, Lily was helping Marina identify the different parts of an engine when Albert hurriedly entered the workshop, carrying a newspaper. Silence took over the room. Buddy, who was dozing in a corner, raised his head, alert to the sudden change in the atmosphere. Lily felt her heart race, not out of fear, but from an emotion she couldn't quite define. Mrs. Helen, who had arrived silently during the reading, cleared her throat gently to get everyone's attention. "Actually, Richard contacted me yesterday. We had a long conversation." Everyone came closer to hear better, including Marina, who was still holding a wrench in her small hands. "We don't need to decide anything now," continued Mrs. Helen. "In fact, I would like to hear your opinion, especially yours, Lily. After all, it was your honesty that started this whole transformation." "I think," she began slowly, "that my dad would be happy to see someone wanting to change for real. He always said that fixing cars is easier than fixing people, but that both need a chance to work right. And more space for the dogs," added one of the boys, making everyone laugh as Buddy wagged his tail animatedly, as if he understood that he was being included in the plans. The day of the visit to the Alves mansion dawned sunny, as if the sky itself wanted to bless that new beginning. Lily, accompanied by Mrs. Helen, Marina, Buddy, and a small group of representatives from the center, watched in awe as the huge iron gates opened before them. The garden was immense, with ancient trees that provided a welcoming shade. At the main entrance, Clara Alves awaited them with a serene smile. Beside her, Richard maintained a posture different from the arrogance of yesteryear. His shoulders were more relaxed, and his face demonstrated a humility that had previously seemed impossible. As they walked through the wide and elegant corridors, Richard explained his ideas. The library would be maintained and expanded for student use. The triple garage would be transformed into specialized workshops. The ballroom would become an auditorium for lectures and presentations. The office was a welcoming environment, with bookshelves from floor to ceiling and a large oak table in the center. Richard went to an antique cabinet and took out a dusty photo album. Lily felt her heart stop for a moment. There was her father, even younger than in the other photograph she possessed, shaking hands with Anthony Alves. The two smiled with genuine joy, and behind them a banner read, "Hope Garage, Building Futures." "My father wrote something here," continued Richard, turning the photo delicately. On the back, an elegant handwriting said, "Today I met Charlie, a young mechanic with a heart the size of the world. I'm sure that together we will make a difference in the lives of many people." "For years," said Richard, his voice choked, "I tried to bury my father's legacy under a mountain of appearances and lies. But now I understand that true wealth is exactly where he and your father always knew it was, in helping others." Mrs. Helen, who until then had watched in silence, approached with a gentle smile. "You know, Richard, your father and Lily's father built a bridge between people, a bridge made of compassion and hope. Now we have the chance to strengthen that bridge and build others." Lily felt warm tears roll down her face, but they were tears of joy and gratitude. Marina squeezed her hand harder, and Buddy let out a soft bark, as if approving the idea. The dog responded with an enthusiastic bark, making everyone laugh. The sound of joy echoed through the old office, as if the walls themselves were celebrating that moment of reconciliation and renewal. The week leading up to the inauguration of the Charlie and Anthony Alves Institute was filled with intense preparations. The old mansion had been completely transformed. The walls gained cheerful colors, the rooms were equipped with modern tools and computers, and the garden gained welcoming benches under the ancient trees. On the eve of the big day, while Lily was helping to organize the last shipment of tools in the main workshop, Mrs. Helen hurriedly entered, carrying an expression that mixed anxiety and joy. Intrigued, Lily followed the lady through the newly painted corridors, with Buddy trotting faithfully by her side. As they approached the office, familiar voices reached their ears, making their hearts leap. Mrs. Helen opened the door with an emotional smile. Inside the office, talking with Richard and Clara, was John Smith, her father's former student. But he wasn't alone. Beside him, sitting in a wheelchair but with the same gentle smile that Lily remembered so well, was Charlie, her father. Lily ran into her father's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Buddy, immediately recognizing his former owner, jumped and barked with joy, his tail wagging frantically. "The accident was very serious," explained John, his voice choked. "Charlie was in a coma for months in a hospital in another city. When he finally woke up, he had temporarily lost his memory. It took all this time to recover and remember who he was. It was the articles about the new institute that helped me recover the last pieces of the puzzle," continued Charlie, stroking his daughter's hair. "When I read about a little mechanic named Lily and her dog Buddy, something sparked in my mind. John helped me connect the dots." "There's nothing to forgive," interrupted Charlie gently. "What matters is that we are all here now, and the dream that your father and I shared is more alive than ever." "Actually," smiled Charlie, "I think I know exactly where it should stay." He turned to Lily. "How about we hang this wrench on the wall of the main workshop? That way, both Anthony and I can continue teaching through the hands of all the young people who pass through here." "I know you will, my daughter," replied Charlie, kissing her forehead. "You're already doing it, and now we can do it together." Lily, dressed in a new overall specially made for the occasion, nervously adjusted the historic wrench in its place of honor on the wall of the main workshop. Buddy, wearing a graceful blue bow tie, watched his owner's every move attentively. The inauguration ceremony began promptly at 10 o'clock. The garden was crowded, former students of the Hope Garage, local businessmen, authorities, journalists, and of course the children and teenagers who would be the first students of the Institute. Mrs. Helen was the first to speak. With her characteristic elegance, she told the story of how a small act of kindness, a girl fixing a car without asking for anything in return, had triggered a series of events that culminated in that moment. Richard took the stage next, visibly emotional. "For years, I tried to build a reputation based on appearances," he admitted. But I learned, through the example of a child, that true greatness lies in the simplicity of honesty and in the purity of good deeds. Clara Alves then presented a surprise video, an old recording of Anthony Alves talking about his dreams for the Hope Garage. His voice, preserved by time, echoed through the garden. "We don't just build mechanics here, we build citizens, we build futures." "A year ago, I thought I had lost everything," began Charlie, his voice strong despite the emotion. "But today, I see that nothing is really lost when we plant seeds of kindness. My daughter Lily has not only kept alive the values I tried to teach her, but has made them flourish in ways I could never have imagined." A procession of children and teenagers formed, each carrying a carefully polished tool. One by one, they hung the tools on a large panel next to the historic wrench, forming a beautiful artistic composition. John Smith, now technical coordinator of the Institute, rose to make the final announcement. "And now, I am pleased to inform you that our first classes are already fully booked. In addition, thanks to the donations received, we will be able to offer full scholarships to all students." A thunderous round of applause echoed through the garden. Lily, amidst tears of joy, felt her father's hand squeeze hers. On the other side, Marina held her other hand, and Buddy, as always, remained faithfully by her side. A year had passed since the inauguration of the Charlie and Anthony Alves Institute. Autumn was once again painting the leaves of the ancient oak tree with gold, and a gentle breeze carried the sound of laughter and the clinking of tools through the now even more flowered garden. Lily, who had turned 11 the week before, supervised a group of children learning the basic principles of mechanics. Beside her, Marina, now her official assistant, demonstrated how to properly use a screwdriver. Buddy, a little grayer but still full of energy, maintained his constant watch over his young owner. On the other side of the garden, Charlie taught a theoretical lesson under the shade of the trees. His wheelchair, now equipped with a small adapted table, allowed him to continue teaching with the same passion as always. Although doctors said he would probably never walk again, his smile remained as bright as before. Mrs. Helen and Clara Alves had become an inseparable duo in the administration of the Institute. Their different life experiences complemented each other perfectly, creating a management that mixed efficiency and humanity. Richard, in turn, discovered an unexpected talent for fundraising, using his old network of contacts to ensure internship and employment opportunities for graduate students. On a particularly busy afternoon, while a new class was preparing for their first practical lesson, a familiar car parked at the entrance to the Institute. Albert, the former driver who now coordinated the free school transportation program, got out of the vehicle with a mysterious smile. From the car came an elderly gentleman leaning on a cane. It was Dr. Martin, the doctor who had donated the first building for the shelter. But he wasn't alone. He brought with him a folder full of documents and a hopeful gleam in his eye. The news spread quickly through the Institute, filling everyone with renewed hope. But for Lily, even the possibility of seeing her father walking again was not the most important thing. The real miracle had already happened. It was there, around her, in the smile of each child who discovered their vocation, in the pride of each young person who won their first job, in the friendship that had flourished between such different people. That night, after classes, the entire extended family of the Institute gathered in the garden for a small fellowship coffee. Under the stars that began to dot the sky, Lily watched the people who had become so special in her life. Her father, telling old workshop stories, Marina excitedly explaining her latest projects, Mrs. Helen and Clara planning new initiatives, Richard genuinely involved in a conversation with the students about their future aspirations. Buddy, lying at Lily's feet, sighed contentedly. The girl smiled, stroking his soft ears. "You know, Buddy," she whispered, "I think I finally understood what Dad meant about being truly rich. It has nothing to do with money. It has to do with how much love we are able to give and receive." The dog responded with a soft bark, as if agreeing. Above them, the first star of the night shone brightly, like a complicit wink from the universe, confirming that sometimes the greatest treasures are those that cannot be stored in safes, but that fill our hearts with joy and hope.